Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, CANSO Academy Atfm Performance Analysis webinar. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you'd prefer to join over the telephone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentations. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Segun Fucharoon, or better known as Kin. Kin is currently a member of the Atfm implementation team at Airborne and also a co-chair of CANSO Atfm ACDM work group. Once more, Kin, thank you very much for your time today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen, for the technical walkthrough and for the introductions of myself. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you out there attending our session today on Atfm post-operations analysis. As Helen mentioned, my name is Segun Fucharoon or Kin, and I am a member of the Atfm implementation team here at Airborne, and also co-chairing the CANSO Atfm ACDM work group for CANSO. And I will be your moderator for the session today, in which we will be talking about one of the most important topics and also one of my favorite topics relating to Atfm, that of post-operations analysis. So before we begin, let me give a little bit of a grounding for this session so that you all can understand why we are doing this. And the reason why we need to be talking about the Atfm post-operations analysis is, I think, best captured by one of the quotes from a famed Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, in which he said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Now, to turn that into an Atfm related topic, I paraphrase his words a little bit, and you get that Atfm also needs to be understood backward in order for it to be improved going forward. And I would believe that the experts involved in ICAO, in the authoring of ICAO Manual on Collaborative Atfm, or Doc 9971, seems to also agree with me, because inside Doc 9971, there is a text. The post-operations analysis is actually captured as one of the cornerstone in developing the best practices and or lessons learned that will further improve the operational processes and activities in Atfm. So it is a fact that the post-operations analysis in Atfm is an important process, even though it is sometimes forgotten by ANSPs and by stakeholders implementing Atfm, perhaps because the focus is usually in implementing new system, is usually on the procedures, on the systems itself, and perhaps the looking back at the operations gets forgotten. So today we are putting together this webinar so that we can talk a little bit about what does it take to do Atfm post-operations analysis, what are the different pieces of post-operations analysis, and how are they being carried out around the world. And I hope that this webinar will be very useful for all of you attending today, because, next slide please. What we have lined up is a series of topics to be given by various different experts from around the world, where we first begin with the talking about a little bit of a theory sections to it, right? A theory of Atfm post-operations analysis. What are the different key considerations when you are going about analyzing Atfm operations? And then follow the theory sections. Then we have lined up 3 different case studies from NSPs that have been doing Atfm for a number of years, and they are very mature in the Atfm post-operations analysis process. And following the 3 case studies, then we will wrap it up by looking at a bigger picture now, in terms of ATFM implementation as a whole? How do you quantify some of the benefits that are coming from the implementation? Now, quantifying the benefits, of course, will rely on the results coming out from the post-operations analysis process. So it is going hand in hand between the running the analysis after the events to assessing the benefits after the implementation. So that is with that grounding for the day. I would like to get us going. Now, before that, let me remind you though that, as Helen has mentioned, the questions can be provided. Questions can be asked of the panelists by typing it into the questions box. At the end of all the presentations, we will have the panelists coming on to answer some of the questions that you have. And I would like to really encourage you all to use the questions box today, because the panelists that we have are very experts in their field, and this is a good opportunity for you to engage with them. So without further delays, I would like to bring on the first panelist that we have for today, who will be talking us through the theory sections of the ATFM post operations analysis, Dr. Jesper Brunsberg of Air Services Australia. Jesper is the Network Performance and Analysis Manager at Air Services Australia. He holds a bachelor's and master's in aerospace engineering from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, and a PhD in telecommunications engineering from the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid in Spain. I apologize for my impeccable Spanish there. He started with Air Services in 2008 and has been in a diverse range of roles, including strategy development, leading network operations, and now managing network performance and analytics. He was monumental because he was also monumental in the development of ICAO Asia Pacific's ATFM post-operations analysis recommended framework, which he will be talking about a little bit today. And he is also a valuable member, one of the most valuable members of CANSO ATFM ACDM workgroup, and has brought to the table his expertise in ATFM analytics and development. So Jesper is the most appropriate person we have to be giving us a guidance on the theory behind ATFM post operations analysis. Jesper, welcome to the webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ken, for that very kind introduction. I hope I can live up to the expectation. Helen, next slide, please. Thank you. So I guess the very first question is, why does analyzing ATFM actually matter? Now, first and foremost, ATFM performance analysis is integral to the success of ATFM and collaborative decision-making in general. And as Ken highlighted, it's unfortunately quite often overlooked as different ANSPs and states implement ATFM. So what we really are saying is that we very much recommend that once ATFM is being considered for implementation, that as part of that implementation exercise, also a framework is being developed on how ATFM and its performance is going to be managed. We would also recommend that in developing one of those frameworks, that framework is tailored to the specific implementation of ATFM within that state, but also to ensure that you involve all your different stakeholders as part of that exercise. One way of looking at the of implementing a performance framework is looking at it in two different levels. So the first level is focusing on the why of ATFM, linking back to the original benefits that were envisaged when ATFM was being implemented or being envisaged. And as it can indicate, Stuart will provide a little bit later on a bit more on ATFM benefits. So the first level is quite important, so focusing on the why of ATFM, and that level is important to do kind of reporting of benefits that reports back onto your managers and executives to get the impression whether or not the ATFM implementation is actually delivering on its benefits. The second level is more the operational level and focuses on the how, and really provides an insight in how well ATFM is working and functioning. So obviously those two levels, so the why level and the how level, the more operational level, they're very much interdependent and both are very important as part of your overall framework. Now, as I highlighted as well, a key one thing that's very important as part of developing a framework is that as an ANSP, you don't do this on your own. You involve the different stakeholders that are part of your ATFM implementation. Because in order to achieve a predictable ATM network, really it is the responsibility of all stakeholders that are involved. As an ANSP, obviously, we are responsible for ensuring we deliver on the capacity and we manage the ATFM measures we're putting in place. But obviously, the aircraft operators have a very big role to play as well in terms of making sure that their operations are compliant with any ATFM measure that's been put in place. So therefore, yeah, I strongly believe that ATFM performance analysis is not just about just showing data and demonstrating through metrics how well it's performing, but it's also key in ensuring that you drive a culture of accountability with all your different stakeholders to ensure that everybody plays their role in this very important piece of ATFM. Next slide, please. So this all sounds fairly complex, but fortunately there's some really good guidance material out there, as Kin highlighted. The Asia Pacific ATFM Steering Group has developed this ATFM post-operations analysis recommended framework. It's a very comprehensive document that will provide you with a lot of different detail, all the way from planning, demand, and capacity through to post-operations analysis of different ATFM performance measures. The document is quite extensive, and it's a really good exercise to work through, and gives you a lot of suggestions and guidance on how to implement a framework for your local implementation. We've provided a link here to the document. It may not work on the GoToWebinar, but as the slides will be provided after this seminar, you can click on the link and download the document. And I really would recommend to have a good read through it. As I mentioned, it is quite an extensive document. However, it's very well structured and providing some very good guidance for your implementation. Next slide, please, Helen. So I won't go through the document in detail, but I just want to give you a bit of an overview of the information that you can find within this document. So obviously the first chapter focuses on the objectives of the document and the structure of the document itself. The second chapter is also very helpful because it sets the context of this document with respect to some of those key ICAO publications that Keen mentioned just previously. And the next two chapters follow the two key concepts of ATFM, as ATFM is fundamentally considered with balancing demand and capacity, that those two chapters really focus on key metrics within those two areas. Those sections are very well structured in the sense that the key metrics that are being proposed are presented through the kind of questions that these metrics aim to answer for your implementation, as well as the data that you require in order to implement these metrics, and whether the level of analysis is deemed fairly complex or rather or very simple to implement. So it really helps you along to identify, okay, what are the key metrics that are quite easy for us to implement, the data that I need, and obviously, most importantly, what are the key questions that these metrics help me answering. Chapter 5 then focus on ATFM measures and how you can analyze the success of an ATFM measure. At the moment, the document very much focuses on ground delay programs as a key ATFM measure or TMI, but the document allows for scope for us to further expand and include multiple TMIs going forward. Chapter 6 is very important as well, and as I highlighted previously, really when you set up this framework for ATFM performance, it's very important that as an ANSP, you don't do this as a silo activity, but you include all the different stakeholders that are relevant to the ATFM implementation. So chapter 6 gives some really good guidance to that, and it helps to explain the roles and responsibilities of all the different stakeholders within this process. Then the last chapter, chapter 7, really provides a couple of case studies, and it really helps to get a practical example of how this framework is implemented in different states around the world. So there's 3 case studies that are being presented. The first one is India, and that case study very much focuses on chapter 3, so looking at demand reliability, and it focuses on the work that's been done in India around flight planning, predictability of how flight plans are being provided as part of the system. The second case study is from Airborne and focuses on chapter 5 and provides a good example of how an ATFM measure can be analyzed. The last case study is from us, from Air Services in Australia, and we demonstrate the importance of bringing your stakeholders on board as part of the ATFM performance analysis exercise. Next slide, please, Helen. So in terms of that ATFM measure analysis, one thing that the framework highlights is some 3 key themes around this. And I think that sets a good scene for some of the case studies that are being presented in this webinar later on. So it focuses on around 3 elements. The first one being impact, second one being compliance, and the third one being effectiveness. So the first one, impact, is really looking at, okay, what does the ATFM measure do in terms of ground delay that might potentially be issued as part of a ground delay program? The second part, so really looking at the impact that it has on the operators. The second part, compliance, looks at, okay, how well are operators actually compliant with the measure that's been put in place. And the third one, obviously a very crucial one, is, okay, how effective was this measure? So did it actually deliver the outcome that that was intended? And the case study that my colleagues will present from Air Services will go into this into these 3 elements in quite a bit of detail later on. Yeah, with that said, I hope that provides a short but hopefully a good introduction into the framework that's been developed through the Asia Pacific ATFM steering group. And as I indicated, I would recommend you download that document, have a read. Should you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'll be more than happy to help you along. With that said, Kin, I'm happy to hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesper, for a comprehensive insight into the theory, I call it the theory sections of ATFM post operations analysis. I just want to highlight a couple of things here. One of the things that I really like what you said, Jesper, is using the post ops analysis process to encourage or to cultivate the culture of accountability on the part of all stakeholders. And I'm saying all stakeholders, right? Not just the airlines, the airports, but also the NSPs themselves, right? And when we put out ATFM programs, we need to know, we as an NSP need to know what we are doing, essentially, right? And we want to also be able to make sure and also to demonstrate that what we've decided to do are actually effective, right? And so that's the key behind the post-ops analysis process right there. The accountability on the parts of stakeholders as well. Having been involved in ATFM myself, I would say it is a very important for us to have a conversation with our stakeholders after each, or after every so often when we having run the ATFM programs, just to make sure that what we are seeing on the operations floor has a reason, right? There's a reason for high compliance, there's a reason for low compliance, there's a reason for ineffective program, or there's a reason for effective program. So all of that should definitely be built into the post-ops analysis process. So thanks again, Jesper, for sharing with us your expertise right there. There was a question that popped up in the questions box, asking whether the slides will be shared. Yes, the slides will be shared after the webinar. We'll also try to capture the questions and also try to share the answers to all the questions. But I will talk about that a little bit later when we're doing our open questions and answers at the end. But rest assured, the slides will be shared, so you do not have to worry about trying to screen capture, the slides on your computer, right? Now that we have learned about the ATFM, the theory of ATFM post-operations analysis, I'm going to move us now into the case study sections. And we have lined up three expert panelists coming from 3 different ANSPs to give us the case studies on their post-operations analysis process within for their ATFM operations. As we go through these case studies, I like you to focus on I like you to not necessarily just focus on the technologies or the tools or the complexities of these NSPs. These are mature NSPs having done ATFM for a number of years. So don't be don't be intimidated by the complexity of the process, but focus rather on the process, right? On their process, on the kind of questions that they ask of their ATFM operations, on the kind of process that they put in place to make sure that post-operations or post-events analysis is part of their ATFM operations and how they can make use of it, right? So the first case studies that we have is coming from NATS UK, and with that, to walk us through that, we have Mr. Dan Schuller, manager of Cesar Concept and Future ATM Evolution, here with us. Dan came from an air traffic control background with 30 years of experience and is still keeping current as airspace capacity manager within the UK flow management position, working closely with Eurocontrol network manager. His knowledge in air traffic flow and capacity management has led him to now focus on the development of network optimization within the CESAR concept of operations and airspace capacity management strategy within NAT's future vision. Dan will share with us the role of post-operations analysis as it is done in the UK, and I'd like the audience to listen to Dan and focus on how NATS UK is using and integrating the post-operations analysis into their day-to-day operations, in making sure that every single day that they do their operations is always an improvement from the day before. Dan, welcome, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Kim, for the introduction, and hello all. As Kim was highlighting, this presentation is intended as an overview of the NATS experience with post-ops. I'm not intending to drill down specifically into the detail of our performance sort of targets and everything else, but it's more intended to be a view as to how we see post-ops at the moment, but also importantly how we see post-ops evolving to support our future operation as we move into a more system-driven and definitely a more sort of trajectory-based environment in the future. Helen, next slide, please. And the one after that, so I've already jumped ahead one. Here we go. So our airspace, just a little bit of context as to what we manage. As the UK, as a NATS operation, we sit in the northwest corner of Europe, interfacing the North Atlantic. Our operation has always been subject to significant daily variation in demand, primarily as a consequence of where we sit geographically, because of the orientation and strength of the jet stream and its impact on the European to North America and vice versa, that axis. Note also, sort of on this diagram here on this map, our airspace, the oceanic airspace, which sort of volumetrically takes up a large chunk of sort of our managed airspace, is actually outside the European EUR region, and it's not managed as per domestic airspace. It's more strategic, but even here, the legacy sort of way of managing the ocean is using the organised track structure is arguably on its way out to be managed slightly differently in future. And also, there's a gap in the middle here with the Irish airspace. NATS does have a sub-regional responsibility for Irish domestic airspace. So our operation really fits quite nicely in the whole block of airspace that is in the northwest. Next slide, please, Helen. And again, a little bit more context to highlight the fact we have two ACCs for the NATS operation, or the en route side of the NATS operation. And whilst NATS is the airspace ATC provider for the UK area of responsibility, the airport ATC side is also part of the game as well. ATC in the UK is sort of, the airport is not monopolistic, it's open to competition, but irrespective as to who sort of manages the airport operation, NATS, via its FMP operation, still has responsibility for managing and integrating ATFM or ATFCM in Europe across the entire area of responsibility. And next slide, please, Helen. Yes, okay, so just a run through of our post-ops experience more than anything else. As I was mentioning, just with reference to the map, the NATS operation is primarily, it's a node within the European region. We're not siloed, and I think as mentioned in the introduction, there is the integration aspect of ATFM and the post-ops and the whole ATFM is a key part of it is integration with the wider world. And our wider world within the European region is via the Brussels-based network manager. The NM network manager, they effectively the umbrella organization for the region, and they provide common data services and capabilities to manage the overall region in a coordinated and efficient way. Having said that, NATS is subject to its own national performance targets, and these are set for us by our regulator, the CAA, in terms of delay and efficiency. And importantly, if we fail to meet them, we are penalised financially within each reference period. But there is definite sort of impetus for us to ensure that we meet our performance targets. And performance targets broadly are in terms of your performance target KPIs are subdivided. We either have in terms of regulation delay, so natural attributable capacity, staffing or technical delay. And it's even within this, it's not just a raw figure on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly, or a year, whatever it's going to be. These the delay targets are actually weighted to reflect their potential negative impact on the stakeholders and customers within our sort of area responsibility. For example, if we sort of incur or we are responsible for delays within the first rotation period, which is the vital period for airspace users to start their operation. If we incur delay within that period, there is a multiplier that actually sort of makes it actually reflects that level of importance to the operators. So we go out of our way to try and manage demand, sort of a delay down to the minimum during these key periods. Otherwise, the impact on us is even greater. Outside regulation delay, in terms of your minutes incurred, we also have a measure which is 3DI. So this is your 3D inefficiency metric. And this is both an environmental and an efficiency measure, which allows the capture of individual deviation from a flight from its planned profile. In reality, it's one of the sort of the drivers that allows us to see the impact of reducing holding within the TMA for the likes of Heathrow, Gatwick Stansted, primarily on the London TMA, and start to transfer some of the inefficient sort of holding into linear holding as it sort of before and during its descent. So this is it's a driver that, whilst it's imposed by the regulator, helps us to manage our operation and helps the specifically airspace user absorb sort of some of the negatives in sort of any delays. In addition to these regulatory targets, we also have company performance targets, and these are sort of your more tactical measures, a way of sort of making sure that we keep tabs on our tactical measures. For example, sort of ground delay programs that we sort of wrap up into the terms of the STAM, which is short-term ATFM measures. Yeah, so a lot of words, but that has its own dedicated airspace and capacity management operations tools and teams to manage all of these processes. And this team is responsible for the identification of demand and capacity imbalance in planning in each of the ATM phase. So you've got strategic, pre-tactical, tactical, and you're running into post-ops at the other end. And also this team will be leading the collaborative decision-making that whereby the plan to best meet a lot of competing demands is actually sort of devised and actually managed to an outcome. The aim of all of these, this whole process, is to optimize our capacity. Capacity is really important. So we optimize our capacity as an aim before we look to intervene to manage demand. This is either through management of your airspace, which is segregated activity, whether primarily that's going to be your military sort of airspace activations. But in the future, there's more than likelihood it'll be more than military as your unmanned operations start to take sort of greater prominence in the airspace. Sectorization. What is the best sectorization combination that's going to best match demand? And finally, making the best use of our ATC staffing, which is inextricably linked to sectorization. And to say the capacity aspect is really important. And I mentioned before, this picks up on the European Convention of using ATF-CM rather than just ATFM, the seaplane capacity. We're making the best of the limited capacity, or finite capacity resources, enables what you can arguably say is free running of the network, because it's in our interests, not from a performance target sort of perspective, from everybody's perspective, to impose as fewer constraints as possible on your airspace users in terms of demand intervention, as each demand intervention results in an unknown consequence. So we regard it as best, say, to meet your capacity rather than impose sort of demand. It's not to say we don't impose demand intervention, we do, but the way we do it is ideally in a managed way and causing at least delay against our targets. And finally, post-ops is the key element in informing the decision making in each of these phases. So, Helen, next slide, please. Limitations, current planning. Okay, to plan the UK operation, what do we use? We use the Network Managers Data Services, which are entitled DDR2, Demand Data Repository, which captures historic file plans within the entire European region over a number of years in the past. In the pre-tactical time frame, this view of demand is transferred into the operational toolset called Predict, where you also have an introduction of the effect of forecast met and forecast and planned demand interventions and everything else that goes with it. So it's a view of the network status. And the NM forecast overall provides a really good view of the forecast operation and influenced by these known interventions and known variables. However, and it's a big however, is the need to address how we bridge the gap between the forecast and the actual and provide enough flexibility in the tactical operation to manage the inevitable imbalances not picked up in forecasting. And it's providing the balance. So it's it's there to stop us either going overboard with precautionary demand intervention, i.e. we just overdo this sort of regulations in advance, or we over-resource ATC staff to take into account sort of so many variables that it imposes massive sort of the resource demand on us in ANSP, which results in an inefficient ATC operation and cost to the user. So post-ops really is used to provide context to this raw forecast data in planning phases to mitigate this gap between the forecast and the actual being the real sort of real-time demand that is derived from flight plans, which we get to the next slide, I think, Helen, if we could. Yes, so the application of the post-ops in pre-tactical. So its application of post-ops and pre-tactical enables informed allocation of capacity rules, ATC staff. I'll touch on this briefly, and likewise airspace allocation. The ATCO rosters are published monthly. It's at a set date in the calendar up to 5 weeks before date of operation. And once published, we have limited scope to revise, apart from the use of rather expensive overtime, and even then the ability of overtime is not a panacea. So there's a need to get the rostering right some weeks in advance of the day of operation. And this isn't fully satisfied using historic data alone. Going back to my previous stuff about the fact that forecast is not perfect. So this is where post-op comes in and is used to provide the additional insight to catch those hidden hotspots within the network and identify those optimal configurations whereby we can sort of best use our ATCOs with the right configurations and getting them in if they have limited number of options. And airspace allocation, just identifying the best geographical, vertical, temporal location of segregated airspace that allows us to meet the needs of the sponsor and also other airspace users. Application of post-ops enables effective planning of sector configurations that favors tactical measures. Yeah, clearly there are some configurations that will enable, for example, level capping. You wouldn't necessarily to offload an overloaded sector when that sector goes from basically of controlled airspace to 6,000 feet all the way up to flight level 660. The options for tactical level capping are very, very few. However, if you opt for a vertical stratification that you have a 245 flight level 245 split, you do start to have options. So it's just that level of basic sort of planning that goes into it. And Also, application of post-op and pre-tactical, next bullet point down. We're looking sort of how to utilize for us, we have over 700 different options in the regulation catalog to play with, and that's an awful lot. So the use of regulations that effectively, I mean, if we have to resort to regulations, we want to use those that distribute the delay to effectively manage in the best way we can, ideally in terms of workload and complexity. So identifying so you're identifying the likely impact of a regulation. Does it create low individual delay that can be absorbed by the airspace user without refile, or does it, in experience, create high delay, which encourages airspace users to refile and go on to an alternative route? You want to know what has happened in the past to be able to influence what you're going to be doing in the future. And next bullet point down is workload complexity. Workload complexity is a whole different topic, and I can go on about it for a long time, but ultimately you manage your ATC operation primarily sort of in tactical with using workload and complexity or ATC team. Workload complexity can only really be understood and a reasonable sort of output from that in tactical itself when you have real trajectories. Irrespective of that, you will still have an indication from post-ops of a complex scenario. So it's trying to identify the complexity and workload associated with a scenario that you have seen in the past, you'll potentially be seeing in the future, which will influence your planning. And finally on this page, you enable identification of preferred strategies in planning. So in the event of X happening, scenario Y is pre-noted it's already been pre-noted. So everybody, if you have a pre-baked plan for the tactical team to use. Helen, next one, please. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm probably taking a little bit too much time here. So application of post-ops in tactical. This is relatively straightforward. As the operation moves into the tactical day, your flight plan data is used by your operational teams, as mentioned before, so you now have real data. Even here, however, your post-ops continues to form the backbone of your responses to monitor and to react. As an example for this one, so you're validating a newly identified imbalance from previous experience, and I can give you an example here. So you have a single runway operation, Gatwick, for us, London Gatwick, single runway option, the ferry operation, very busy. Your predictive tools identify an outbound demand that's going to push your demand within the adjoining sector above capacity. However, the context of that, does it tie in with a busy inbound period? Yes, in which case you are highly unlikely to see a runway usage that will allow that departure flow to get airborne and actually deliver that level of over capacity, over demand within the period. So really, really basic stuff, but this is the sum of all these nuggets of information mean fewer disruptive and unnecessary and precautionary constraints are applied, particularly within your tactical operation. And again, just a final bit here on the tactical, you're looking to support your local tactical team. So the aim here is to provide solutions for local ATC to suppress demand without creating excessive delay or network disruption, which may be, stop all departures, a really penal ground delay program, where a better alternative targeted action, which focuses on managing workload, will do better. And without this guidance, the natural reaction of ATC is to hit the obvious, as they're driven by the need to assure safety and the desire to keep things as simple as possible. And the post-ops process and the post-ops extraction data allows us to provide these alternative strategies that achieve the same result for your local users in tactical from a safety perspective, but without delivering the pain to your airspace users and to your airports. Next slide, please, Owen. I think we're coming to the end. So post-event extraction of lessons, and this is sort of the challenge here. So the challenge is how to extract your relevant data and lessons for the future. What went well? What didn't go quite so well? The trigger for analysis using poor performance as a measure, it's largely straightforward and driven by your statistical thresholds, like delay above forecast or target. However, the thing here is that once the process has been, once you've triggered the need for analysis, the actual process to contextualize the analysis is far more complex. And in this perspective, we're still really reliant on human assessment and cataloging, which is very workload intensive and still open to subjectivity. So the need to capture this operational narrative to understand the rationale for action taken is essential. And if we want to avoid repeating poor performance, or likewise replicating really good performance, this is a really important point. Pre-COVID, NATS was running a weekly debrief, and it's going to be far from the sort of unusual as an ANSP that we do this, but we ran a weekly debrief with the unit managers and external users like airports, airspace users, to capture the lessons from incidents and high delay for the week itself. And it's an essential process to learn, but it does need commitment to make it work. And inevitably, it has to be a really tightly managed process. If you're not careful, your peripheral users, as we found, your peripheral users will start to drop out if they don't see a direct relevance to their operation. Demand on everybody's time is really important, so you have to keep these people engaged. And on to the last slide, if we could, Helen. And yeah, and it's to tackle these challenges of this sort of within the post-ops extraction and understanding the narrative. These things, it may sound small and rather obvious steps here, where we talk about sort of our current program to link ops narrative from what's appear to be a myriad of sources from the operation. We have logs, we have calendars from your planning processes, and of your various sort of applications over across the whole operation. Dragging those onto a common platform that can be accessible and manageable via apps opens up the whole of this data to a much wider audience. So it takes it out of the sort of the realm of a really small core team of experts within ACM and exposes them to the wider operation. So the capability to attach what is a searchable narrative to the raw data itself represents a significant step in post-ops towards a far more efficient system. And finally, the next step, once we talk about this, is the step of how we start to digitalize the process and more effectively integrate the extracted data into planning to close what should be seen as a cyclical process, and is quite often, historically for us at least, a linear process where you have your planning, execution, post-ops. The challenge is how you drag it back and put it back into your planning process with a minimal sort of corruption of that data and the narrative. And this is the future, but post-ops can certainly be satisfied in the current operation with pretty basic processes. But those processes do have reliance on human expertise to analyze. And it is resource hungry in this respect. However, as the operation becomes more complex with the introduction of free route, trajectory-based operations, we're going to have more dynamic operation, which is less compatible with these tried and tested solutions, which almost necessitates us as an ASP in the future trying to capture some of the needed capabilities in the future tool set, such as a modeling capability that incorporates post-ops data seamlessly to give you a probabilistic view. But this is algorithms, this is starting to talk about machine learning, this is starting to talk about AI. It moves, but it moves quickly, but there is a certain inevitability that this is where we have to go. But I'm conscious of the fact that I've probably taken up too much time here. But just to finally finish, interesting times ahead. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the comprehensive view of how post-operations analysis is actually very well integrated into every single phase of ATFM operations in the NATS UK. One of the first things that Daniel mentioned that I really like a lot is how NATS has set very, very clear targets, right? There's a clear performance targets for which you actually comply or you actually focus on, right? And I think that's an important first step in doing ATFM analysis, right? And you need to know what targets are you striving for. And I think Daniel has mentioned pretty clear that NATS has a very clearly structured process in going towards the targets of operations there, right? There are actually a number of questions for you, Daniel, but I'm going to keep them for the Q&A sessions at the end. So I'm going to now move on to the next case study, but thank you, Daniel, for coming and sharing with us. For the next case studies, we are going to zoom in a little bit, right? Daniel has shared with us the sort of an overview picture of how post-ops analysis process is used in a kind of an entire lifespan of ATFM operations. Now we're going to zoom in a little bit and focus on how post-operations analysis is carried out on a specific ATFM measures. When you run a specific ATFM programs, how do you go about analyzing those performance? And to walk us through that, we have two experts coming from Air Services Australia. These are Jesper's colleagues from Australia joining with us today. The first one is the Dr. Daniel Chowries, a senior ATM performance analyst with Air Services. Daniel received his PhD in physics from the Australian National University and spent some time in a data science startup before moving into aviation with Air Services, where he specializes in ATM metrics and simulations, ATFM, quantitative risk and safety analysis, and most recently, modeling of traffic under the COVID-19 situation. He also teaches ATM and supervises students at the Australian Defence Force Academy and the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. He is going to be joined by Mr. Philip Dawson, who is leading a team of data scientists specializing in ATM performance insights at Air Services. Now, Phil has worked in operational performance quantification in safety and airspace redesign for a number of years before shifting the focus recently to ATM and ATFM post-operations performance reporting in support of data-driven decision-making in the organization. Phil has a degree in aviation management from University of New South Wales, Sydney, and he will be jointly presenting the case study from Air Services Australia together with Daniel. So welcome you guys, and please take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. That was a very kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be presenting a little bit of the other side of the world, what we have going on in Australia, what sort of challenges we have within our environment. Probably in context, I think Dan said UK manages 11% of Europe's airspace, Australia manages 11% of the world's airspace. Similar sort of traffic levels for some of the ACCs. We manage about 4,000 flights per day pre-COVID. A little bit different today, unfortunately, but that's a pretty common theme across the world at the moment. We control traffic at 29 towers. We have 2 en route centres, and the predominance of traffic is between 4 airports: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth, and that represents about 30% of traffic that operates between those 4 airports. And that's predominantly where we use ATFM, CDM to manage some of the variations that we have in capacity available at some of those airports. They don't have the luxury of having parallels at all those airports, but Brisbane, just to the north east of Australia, opened up their parallel runway during COVID last year. We're waiting to see that tested out to its full capability, and quite excited to see that. But yeah, that's a bit of the background. So Dan was talking about in the UK context of regulations or ATFM measures for airspace and airport. Predominantly in Australia, we have airport-related constraints and ATFM measures to control the imbalance between capacity and demand airports. As an example, Sydney Airport, on a good day, we'd be running 48 arrivals per hour. If the weather permitted, we could be on a cross runway situation, and that drops our arrival rate down to sort of 24 arrivals per hour. So ATFM plays a really big part in managing, that variation in demand, and making sure that we get a good outcome on the day. Next slide, please. So in terms of how post-ops fits with CDM in the air services and Australian context, essentially we have our plan, which is done the day of ops -1, so the day prior, and that process goes through a collaborative decision-making process, which involves our National Coordination Centre and our 2 operational en route centres, our major airline customers, and our Bureau of Met team, who do the meteorological forecasts for the whole of Australia. So essentially those stakeholders come together and assess the risks which are going to happen for the following day, and come up with a plan of what the best configuration is for the network across the ports where risks are identified. There are a set of business rules which accompany that process to guide that decision making and the consideration of the different risks which may face the network on the next day. The outcome of that collaborative decision making process is a network operations plan that's distributed to all stakeholders, and that then rolls into the execution on the day of ops. Throughout the day of ops, there's a update to those plans the following morning, midday, and constant monitoring by our operations center and our customers as well. And should that need to be reviewed, then a process is initiated to bring all the stakeholders together and assess any amendments that need to be made to that plan. We then move into the review process, the post-ops element. That takes place every morning at 8:45. We review the previous day's performance in terms of what happened and why. So that's really crucial, that we get really good data flows so that we can perform that analysis. And one of the biggest challenges for this is getting all the relevant information in a timely manner. When we sort of started on this journey, that was one of the really key parts to go, okay, well, what information do we need or can we get, and how quickly can we get it? And then sort of work through the catalog of data or information that you need. Dan talked about the narratives. That's a really key part of it, and getting the operational input to provide their logs and input so you can understand why things happened the way they did. And that was a really key part around how the decisions were made, what decisions were made, and what the considerations were around those decisions. So the 8:45 is a really important part. We then also have what we call a post-operational performance review, which is a bit of a deep dive into a particular event that might have occurred through the network, and they are identified through our post-ops meetings. And depending on the nature of what we find, what the event entailed, we will bring in different SMEs to that process to make sure that we get the right cross-section and understanding of an event and the right inputs, and so we can get those lessons learned from particular events and feed them back into the process. We also look at, as Dan said, we do weekly debriefs with our all the CDM participants. We review the past week's performance, and so this provides a level of transparency and accountability to all participants. and everyone understands, what the outcomes were and why. So there's an accountability part there. We also do monthly and quarterly reviews. Notwithstanding that, we also do systemic reviews. So if we identify something through a post-operational performance review, or just the general ongoing monitoring at the post-ops meetings each day, if we identify something there which is warrants a look at parameters of the ATFM system, for example, we then can initiate a deep dive into looking at, well, are some of those parameterizations working, or is there something that could be improved in those parameters? Next slide, please. So the slide we have up here is a bit of a snapshot of part of the post-operational report that we send out daily to all our stakeholders. Essentially, the design process that we went through with this report was to be able to quickly see what happened and why. So this is the what happened, a couple of the what happened elements, and there's also a number of why elements. It's all built on Tableau, which is basically a data exploration dashboarding tool. So we have all the underlying data at our fingertips. So if we need to look into, one of the elements that's shown on the screen here, we can click and drill into it and find, different layers which are happening beneath it and what's going on beneath the surface. This is all aggregated to the hour. The challenge is to aggregate it to a level which provides you a level of understanding, but not too much detail that you can't see what's going on. So there's sort of a bit of a balance to be had there. If I just step you through what we've got going on the screen. So if we look at the top pane there, we've got some triangles and some bars. The bars show what the achieved throughput was for a particular hour. In terms of the triangles, we've got some blue triangles, so light blue and dark blue. They essentially are the predicted capacity which comes out of the CDM process. The orange triangles are what the tactical arrival rate for the airport was on the day. So then we can look at the delta quickly on this chart to see, well, what did we predict and what did we achieve on the day? And Daniel is going to talk a bit more about that in some of the upcoming slides and how we look at that at a strategic level. Beneath that, one point there. So in terms of those bars, we have light grey and dark grey components to the bars. The light grey is our domestic traffic, which is subject to ATFM measures. The dark grey are the international flights, which are not subject to the ATFM measures. So we make a distinction between those elements, so we can see which aircraft are affected by ATFM measures and which ones aren't, because a lot of the time, obviously, if you've got 50% of your traffic which is not subject to an ATFM measure, then that might give you a bit of an indication of why your ATFM program wasn't particularly effective. So there's a few, refinements that we made along the way as we sort of build this report, and that was one of the key ones. Underneath that, we have essentially what the outcome was. So we have the airborne arrival delay in the dark blue line, and we have our ATFM or ground delay in the light blue line underneath. So you can sort of see the tracking and the proportions of delay there. And I guess, you don't want to have one skewed heavily in one direction and none of the other. So you're kind of looking for that balance there. And yeah, it's really about finding what a good outcome looks like very quickly from these graphs, and linking that with some of the narrative and understanding, well, did we do well or did we not? Then feeding back and drilling down and understanding, well, what could we have done better? So now I'll probably hand over to Daniel, and he's going to take us through how compliance and effectiveness is viewed at a sort of macro level. This was sort of the micro level view of a daily view of what's going on. So thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Phil. So on the next slide, I'm now going to jump from essentially just a day to a whole month by introducing our first ATFM KPI, the capacity predictability. As Phil already outlined earlier, some of our airports, the airport capacity is extremely weather dependent, so it's crucial to get a very good estimate of the rate that's going to be achieved the day before already. We're doing this through the CDM process, which involves air services, and meteorologists, and the airports and airlines as well. On the right, we see a graph which essentially outlines how this process went for about a month. On the horizontal axis, we see what kind of capacity was predicted, and on the vertical axis, what the actual capacity was. So in a perfect world where your KPI is always 100%, all the dots would lie neatly on this red line going as the diagonal. In reality, we see that that's relatively well achieved for some of the rates around the mid-30s. And if you go to a little bit higher rates, let's say about a predicted rate of 46, we're seeing like a little red island over there, where typically the actual capacity was more around 42. So you're predicting 46 and you're constantly achieving 42, which would be a prime example of post-ops going back to the planning process and understanding why this constant under delivering of a rate occurs. To put it in context, if the demand is that strong that we would have 46 aircraft coming, and we can only land 42, this would be 4 aircraft more than airport can handle at that hour. So if this is occurring over a couple of hours, you're getting 4, 8, 12 aircraft, and your airborne delay gradually goes higher and higher. Or just to summarize it, incorrect rates lead to inefficient ATFM, because it's exactly the same in the opposite case. If we constantly in a certain situation predict very, very conservative low rates, but then we're achieving rates which are a lot higher, we would have wasted capacity and kept aircraft on the ground to the ground delay program, which could have been handled earlier. So next slide. So if you not think of a case where your predicted capacity was 34 and you achieved exactly 34, what other consideration have to be done? And that's where our capacity utilization KPI came from. And this is essentially a direct implementation of the CANSO definition of this capacity. We're measuring the efficiency of our airport capacity. On the right, we see a couple of examples where a rate of 34 was achieved for 8, 9, 10 o'clock, and the actual throughput, a little bit in darker below, was slightly lower, even if the demand would have been high enough to get enough aircraft to land. So why is this happening? Why are we constantly under-delivering in those kind of periods? Well, it's more a measure how efficient are we using the capacity, and the little aircraft there on the left can illustrate what prime reason for this less than 100% capacity utilization is. So using ATFM measures, all those 6 gray aircraft would be neatly stacked, all equidistant distances, and then land all without any airborne delay. In reality, those flights are in the air for 1, 2, 3 hours if they're domestic typically, and gonna have some kind of a variation. So in a hypothetical scenario, they might arrive like those orange aircraft over there, like one is punctual, one is a little bit earlier, one is a little bit late. So suddenly aircraft 3 arrives in a period where it leaves a certain gap. So essentially for your 34 capacity per hour, so 34 landings per hour, we now lost at least half or maybe one slot, which isn't recoverable. And that's leading to less efficient utilization. The primary reason for this, and that's actually neatly where our next next KPI comes in, is the compliance of individual aircraft with respect to the GDP. So next slide. So if you now assume an aircraft is going to get a slot for an arrival, it's automatically going to get a similar time to depart from its airport a couple of hours earlier. And in a perfect world, all of those aircraft would leave exactly due to the minute at the allocated departure time. To investigate this, we modified the CANSO KPI a little bit. So normally you would look at the departure time and how your actual departure time varies over the allocated GDP departure time. Instead of departure times, we're using the off-block times, essentially when an aircraft leaves its gate, just to understand better what is the airlines can improve, and taking the difference between off-block time and takeoff time, which essentially is your taxi time, completely out of the equation. As we're seeing, and that's probably a good thing, there's quite a large bar around 0 minutes, which means an aircraft leaves its gate exactly at the minute the ground delay program allocated it. But we're also seeing a big spread towards negative values up to about 5 minutes, and in the other direction as well. As a compliance window, we decided to use -5 to 15, which I think compared with some other NSPs is a relatively generous window. Also, the majority of aircraft does leave within the -5 to 10 minute one. Next slide. So, final KPI I want to introduce, and that's essentially where everything comes together now, the airborne delay, or in this particular context, the airborne arrival delay. So on the right, we see an example of a couple of aircraft arriving into Sydney Airport. And since the majority of delay would be when these aircraft are coming into the arrival airport, we almost have no en route airborne delays in our system. We're using a 250 nautical mile boundary. So essentially, when those aircraft are getting to the 250 nautical mile boundary, we're using the ETA, the time they're planning to land, and comparing this with the actual times. And I took an example where there was a little bit of delay in holding patterns. Hence, we see how the actual in the blue at the bottom having a significant higher track miles, and therefore delay in arrival times than planned, which would result in an airborne delay. And then finally, getting the airborne delay from all the aircraft combined for a month period, we're getting an average delay for a particular port. I just want to show the one for Sydney, where we've seen like a trend where airborne delay is gradually going higher and higher, primarily due to increased demand and traffic. And no surprise, I'm pretty sure other NSP would have similar graphs to show. In March 2020, the airborne delay essentially fell down because of the very low number of demand, and we also suspended any ATFM measures at Sydney at that stage. On a positive note, it's slightly going up again. Again, this is obviously related to traffic going up again as Australia recovers from COVID. And I might just repeat what I already said earlier, but one measure of ATFM success is our airborne delay. But if our airborne delay is significantly low, it could be a sign like something is going wrong as well, because you can only achieve this with a relatively strict ground delay. So having like a good ratio between ground delay and airborne delay typically leads to the most efficient situation. On that note, I want to close and thank everyone for their attention.
And thank you, thank you very much, Daniel and Phil, for the really solid and detailed insight into the how Air Services Australia is performing your post operations analysis process. I remember when I was working in the ATFM post ops area and having a lot of conversation with Jesper. One of the first things that I was being very impressed with is the Air Services process in reporting the post ops analysis results regularly to your stakeholders, right? You have in your earlier slides, you were talking about the process where you have starting from weekly to monthly to kind of a regular rounds of stakeholder consultancy. And I'd like to say that that's the model that we use here at Aerotai. We also use the model from you guys from Air Services in informing our decision to try to conduct our stakeholder conversation every so often as well. So we follow you guys. We're not quite there in terms of running a weekly, monthly kind of conversation quite yet, but we definitely look towards your good examples there. Right. So hopefully the audience out there would also have learned the same thing as I have done from Air Services in terms of regular post operations analysis and regular reporting of the results to the stakeholders. So thanks again, guys. Stay tuned because there are questions for you guys towards the at the end. So we're gonna move on to another case study to round it off, our third case studies, where we are moving now to one of the busiest and perhaps the most complex airspaces in the world, where we are going to be seeing how ATFM analysis plays the role in their very complex ATFM operations there. And to walk us through that, we have Mr. Vern Payne of the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA of the United States, here to share his experience. Vern is a quality control manager at the FAA's ATC System Command Center in Virginia, having transitioned to the role after nearly 30 years in various operational and managerial roles within the FAA, starting from being an air traffic control in Albuquerque Center and moving up to being supervisors, and also having been involved in modernization efforts such as the en route automation modernization or ERAM implementation system, before finally transitioning his roles towards the moving eastbound, right, to Virginia and join the team at ATC System Command Center. So Vern is graciously taking the time away from his 8 grandchildren to be with us here today to share how the FAA actually uses post operations analysis to continually improve their ATFM operations. Vern, the floor is yours, sir. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ken. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce you, if you haven't seen this before, to how the FAA utilizes a flow from planning to improving. I saw that in Air Service Australia, they call it LEARN, that's the feedback loop. Here we call it PERDI, just for the initials of plan, execute, review, train, and improve. Now the FAA has done the P, E, and R of PERDI for many years. What we're trying to get implemented and more formalized and stronger foundation for is the train and improve aspects. And they take the longest to implement, because you plan for every day, you execute every day, we review every day, but then we have to develop the mechanisms to do the train, and then how do we track the improvements. So that's our process that we utilize here. Let's go to the next slide, and let's focus in just a little bit on the review component of it, as that's the primary topic of this conference. The FAA reviews daily. In 45 minutes, we will conduct our daily national system review. It's facilitated by the Command Center Quality Control Office, but utilizes all of the FAA regions, FAA facilities, and our CDM partners. So it's a quick review and feedback session with our CDM partners of the previous day. Each month we have our National Collaborative Forum. It's the second Wednesday of each month, where longer term trends have been gathered, reviews of significant events are presented, upcoming projects are discussed, just a broad ranging agenda of topics that are discussed each month. And then we have event driven reviews. If we have a significant weather event or equipment outage or whatever the case may be, sometimes those generate a review of the traffic management that surrounded that event. And that is conducted by the command center, the FAA facilities involved, the flight operators involved in a collaborative forum to be able to tease out all of the elements that went into the problem, and recommendations from flight operators are considered, and all of those are consolidated down into a formal review. And for the significant events, we brief those at the monthly National Collaborative Forum, or the NAS Collaborative Forum, so that everybody has the same information. Annually, there are efficiency goals that are set, and those are goals for the entire system, not just for the FAA or air traffic control, but the stakeholders are very much involved in the setting, tracking, and improving or meeting those goals. Let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to focus in on a concrete example. So we have noticed for a long time that when we have a long-term ground delay program, or GDP, we tend to have uneven delivery. The program starts out really well. It looks nice, everything is controlled, we're meeting the capacity, but then as time goes along, things start to unravel a little bit. So the FAA utilizes Flight Schedule Monitor to implement our ground delay programs, ground stops, airspace flow programs. And so what you're seeing, for those who are not familiar with this, the explanation's on the bottom left-hand side, but the white horizontal bar is the airport capacity. In this case, we're looking at a Newark ground delay program from January 18th of 2019. And the program had been in place for quite a while. We're now at 2207 Zulu. So we're into the evening. And what we had in the first bar and the second bar when the program was issued was right at capacity. However, we are under delivering the first hour that you can see and over delivering the second hour. The black is landed flights, the red is airborne flights. And so we had to go into a ground stop in order to build room to go into airborne holding and push the second hour demand into the third and fourth hours. So we have noticed this pattern for a long time, but as part of that PERDI review process, the effort to continuously improve, we started following the data. What's contributing to this circumstance? So it came down to two things. One is controllers not complying with the control time of takeoff, which that's not a term that we use within the FAA, but it's the ICAO term. So in a minute, I'm going to give you a link to some training that we developed. So be aware that the terminology that is used in that training, should you choose to go view it, is FAA terminology, not ICAO. So that was the first thing that we tackled. was controller compliance with the CTOT, either letting aircraft get airborne too early or too late. As we dove into that, we also recognized that we also have data anomalies that the flight operators are submitting. There was we have found that we have EETs that are being submitted, and the flight schedule monitor uses those ETEs to assign a departure slot that will coincide with the arrival slot. And if we have inaccurate EET information, then the controlled departure slot no longer correlates with controlled arrival slot. And so that's another contributing factor. So let's take a look at what we did about it. The next slide. So that review led to training. The training was developed to educate the air traffic controllers in the towers of the impact that their actions could have on a certain situation if they let aircraft go early or late without following the guidance of getting a new control time of departure if they're going to miss the original one. There is a link there that when you get the briefing materials, you can go download the video that we generated to do that training. And below is a screenshot of part of that, how these aircraft inbound to Newark for this example. The blue flights are late departures, the red flights are early departures, and the white flights are those that departed within their controlled time of takeoff window. And next slide. So what's the next step? Well, training drives the improvement, but in order to track the improvement, we have to have metrics, data to know which way are we trending. Are we improving? Are we getting worse? So dashboards were created that track the departure compliance by district, and then you can drill down to facility and even down to individual flights. And that way, the general manager of each district can, and the air traffic manager of each facility and the individual traffic management coordinators can track how they're doing, and they can see where their problems are. They can take action to improve, and that's tracked over time. And the airlines as well, our flight operators also, as many of these dashboards that we build are shared with them so that they can track how we're doing as well. And then let's go to the last slide. So what's the next step for us? So we've addressed the controller education piece. Now we're going to tackle the next component, which is the inaccurate EETs. This was an analysis that was done for 2019. 41% of the flights had an EET error of less than 5 minutes. 40% of the flights had EET errors that were greater than 5 minutes, and only 19%, I'm sorry, I'm reading that wrong. Excuse me, 19% of the flights had EET errors bigger than 5 minutes. 40% were within the compliance window. So 60% of our aircraft had EETs that were excessively long or excessively short. And so we're digging into this data more. And one of the key pieces of, or the big takeaways for us is that you might think you have an idea what the underlying problem is, but you really need to follow the data, because the data may lead you to an unexpected conclusion or an unexpected analysis of where a problem really lies. So that is our process. That's how we do the review, and then that leads to training, improvement, development of dashboards to track our progress towards our goals, with the eventual plan and goal of improving our system performance, making our flying public more reliable schedules, less carbon emissions, all of those big lofty goals that we all want to be able to achieve, but we have to take them in data-driven small steps that build upon each other to reach that final goal. And with that, Ken, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Vern, for taking us through your examples there. I think what Vern has to share with us is a very, very good example of showing how ATFM post-ops analysis process can actually be used to effectively identify a very specific problems in the operations, right? And when you are able to identify that problems, then you're able to actually pinpoint the specific solutions to implement. I highly recommend when you get the slide later on, the links to see the training video who should work for the audience when you receive these slides. So I recommend going to that link and take a look at the training video. It's quite effective. Thanks for that, Vern, for sharing with us. By the way, just to say, CTOT compliance and the inaccurate information from the flight plans are actually, I think, the $1 million kind of issues that every ATFM's operations in the world probably has faced at some point in their process, right? Ours included here in Thailand, right? So it is very common problems, and I think for the audience out there, for those of you who are planning to or implementing ATFM, you probably will or likely see similar things or learn from the case study shared by Vern here. Thanks, Vern. Now we are going to transition to the last part, not the last, but second to last part of our webinar, where having learned about the theory of ATFM post-ops analysis, having seen the 3 case studies on the specific processes and procedures in doing the analysis, we are going to now zooming out to a bigger picture, right? A bigger picture of looking at ATFM implementation as a whole. How do we quantify whether what we have implemented as an NSP is beneficial, right? And as a sneak peek here, the quantifying the benefits of ATFM, of course, is a natural process that comes after, or that comes during the whole post operations analysis process. So it goes hand in hand with the topic of post operations. With a bigger picture in mind. And taking us through that topic is one of my co-chairs of CANSO ATFM ACDM work group, Mr. Stuart Radcliffe. Now I have had I think Stuart's camera should be coming on in a minute here. While we're waiting for him to come, I have had the privilege, here we go, here he is. I have had the privilege of working with Stuart for a number of years on the regional ATFM project here in Asia Pacific, and also as part of the CANSO ATFM ACDM work group. And he has been a great colleague and mentor for me over the years. Stuart came from a 25-year background as an air traffic controller in South Africa, although his career has stretched much longer than that, right? Because he started out as an air traffic controller, right? And then he moved on into ATFM by diving into the deep end of it, by having his hands in the implementation efforts all around the globe, including South Africa, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East, to name a few. He is actually one of the fellows behind the ICAO manual on collaborative ATFM, so the Doc 9971 that I showed in the beginning of the session. So he's one of the fellows that wrote it, and he is now working as my co-chair for the ATFM ACDM work group, and is also a business development director and principal subject matter expert in ATFM CDM with Metron Aviation. Stuart, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ken, for that introduction, and hi everybody. It's good to be speaking to all of you again. I do so wish this was face-to-face and not via this medium, although it is highly effective. It's good to be sharing this topic with you on ATFM post-event analysis. And I think I'm going to start off with a question, which is probably one of the key questions that we face as air traffic flow managers, or statements rather. And let me ask it as a question. You, as an audience, do you think ATFM causes delay? Is the cause of delay to flights as a result of ATFM. And I asked the question because in my travels throughout the world, one of the regions that I went to in a particular airline that I visited, and I'm not going to mention the region and I'm not going to mention the airline either, but we were invited by the ANSP to go speak to the airline about implementation of ATFM. And the airline representative, a very senior person in the airline, said over their dead bodies, will they support ATFM implementation in the region? And that was a huge surprise to all of us in the meeting. And their reason was that ATFM causes delay. And I think one of the very first things that we need to get through to the community and all stakeholders, that ATFM is not the cause of delay. ATFM is a benefit to all stakeholders. And the delay is caused by weather, military operations, equipment failures, staffing issues, whatever. And ATFM puts the delay in the most appropriate place. So if we could have the next slide, please. So we all know what ATFM, it provides a safe and orderly traffic flows, and I'm not going to go into all of that. But essentially, we know what ATFM, without ATFM on the left-hand side, the graphic there shows you aircraft spinning, radar vectoring taking place, etc. And on the right-hand side, with ATFM implemented, we have a smooth and orderly flow of traffic. Again, traveling throughout the world, going into ANSPs, and even to some operational environments where there are airlines and airport authorities involved, after an education process, it's easy to convince them of the benefits of air traffic flow management. The operational staff often say, please, can we have ATFM immediately? Please, will you assist us to implement ATFM immediately? Because it is, we can see the benefits that will bring us. Unfortunately, sometimes these benefits that are apparent to operational staff are not always apparent to management or to financial people. So it's essential that ANSPs develop and understand the benefits of implementation of ATFM. Next slide, please. So there's a three-step process for benefits of ATFM. And they are, first of all, we've got to understand and derive the benefits. You've got to understand what the benefits will be and how to get to those benefits. Know what benefits to expect. Once we know what those benefits are, we can start to educate the community, the aviation community, with what the benefits are to be. Then we need to assess the performance. That's the next step. Collect the right data. And you've been seeing in the case studies today on how to collect the right data. Compute the right metrics and track performance improvements. And then the last step is improve performance. To conduct regular analysis to identify areas for potential improvement and enact modifications to the procedure. So that's the three-step process. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at the benefit categories, and the major benefit categories, if you look at the star on the right-hand side, the first one we can look is efficiency. Higher throughput during disruptive events converts tactical airborne delay to less costly ground delay. We've heard a lot of discussion today where the ground delay programs puts the delay on the ground, which obviously saves the airlines a significant amount of costs for fuel, aircraft operating costs, crew costs, etc. And the delay is taken on the ground, making it more efficient. The next one we look at is safety. Prevents system overloads. Delays are managed more safely on the ground. Flexibility. The air carriers or aircraft operators mitigate effects of demand capacity imbalances to best suit their business needs. if there's ATF in place, you'll see later on that the airlines particularly can use the information they get from an ATFM process to meet their business needs. And that goes hand in hand with predictability, provides plans that all stakeholders can monitor and help to formulate their business needs. Equity, delays are meted out by a prescribed set of rules rather than ad hoc. If you don't have a robust ATFM process, some airlines may take more significant delay as a result, where other airlines may not have any delays apportioned to them. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at efficiency first of all. The benefit mechanism, ATFM converts delays that would have been absorbed tactically in the air into ground delays, for example. We're talking specifically about ground delays programs here. And I've mentioned already, this saves fuel and emissions and also saves diversions, vectoring, speed control, leveling off for traffic, not facilitating continuous descent operations or continuous climb operations, the extended downwards, all of those tactical interventions which need to take place if there's no ATFM in place. So with ATFM, we have strategic delay on the ground, and the results of that are lower fuel use or low emissions. Next slide, please. So obviously there's a safety enhancement if ATFM is implemented. The controllers out there will know if they've worked busy sectors, when there's just no way of slowing the traffic down. There's no tap that they can just close a little bit to slow the traffic coming into their sector that they're working, how it becomes sometimes unmanageable, and it often results in an unsafe environment. So with ATFM, it levels off the demand and capacity to a manageable process, in enabling the controller to manage it a whole lot easier. Next slide, please. Equity. If there's, without ATFM, there's inconsistent delays, high delays for short-haul flights, resource awards are inconsistent with claims on resources, and then again with ATFM, there's a consistent delays. Delays are absorbed over a broader base of flights. We can, through ATFM, portion the delays to many flights and not just to a few flights, and those few flights will take on the excessive delays. And resource awards are more consistent with claims on resources. Next slide, please. Of course, a big thing in ATFM is predictability. The benefit mechanism control measures are discussed and formed well in advance. Greater stakeholder awareness and involvement. I can remember as a controller many years ago where there was no ATFM at all. We as controllers would just do as we thought best at the time. There was no awareness given to the airlines or to the airport authorities, and we thought that we had everything in our hands and they would just have to fit in with the plans that we had. And of course, that all needs to have changed over time, and there were always volatile plans. The plans were always changed. There was no consistency, and there were short lead times of not giving the airlines the required information timeously for them to be able to take the right planning. Of course, with ATFM, there's stable plans. Everything is agreed upon during the ConOps development. There's consistent plans. There's longer lead times, leading to a whole lot of better predictability. Next slide, please. And of course, there's flexibility. ATFM allows a wider array of air carriers responses and schedule adjustments, except through slot substitutions, through the CDM process. You've heard how all the case studies that have been presented today, there's the CDM process. the stakeholders are consulted and have their input to the whole process of ATFM, which results in high airspace and airport throughput. Without ATFM, there's lost slots, there's fixed delays on high priority flights. And of course, once you implement ATFM, numerous mitigation options, slots retained by owning air carrier, delay relief for higher priority flights. You need to be able to allow flights that maybe have crew flight and duty times. They should be given priority. Flights that have numerous connecting passengers or mercy flights, etc. Through the ATFM process, that will certainly bring benefits. Next slide, please. So we've spoken about all the potential benefits, but how do we go about measuring those? And certainly these are not all the metrics that can be used, but I'm just going to go through a few of them. So the first one we're going to look at, and probably the most important benefit for ATFM, is the efficiency that results of ATFM implementation. So rate control index for measure flow rate, in other words, high values indicate that ATFM measure closely achieved its target throughput. That can be measured. We've seen today in some of the presentations on how the throughput is measured. That is a very important metric that you need to establish. Fuel savings, of course, fuel burn associated with airborne delays are anticipated and converted back to the ground delay. There are systems which are able to measure the fuel savings as a result of ATFM implementation by holding aircraft on the ground. These are very important figures, as is the next one, emission savings, that can be presented to airlines when you're wanting to implement air traffic flow management or have implemented air traffic flow management, and you need to justify the implementation of ATFM to your airspace users. The other thing is to the benefit to air traffic controllers is the reduction in radar vectoring, reduction in speed control, reduction of taking aircraft off routes, off RNAV procedures, extending downward legs. All of those are metrics that can be measured as a benefit of ATFM implementation. And of course, reduce diversions. Diversions are extremely expensive to the airlines, and ATFM certainly can lead to the reduction in diverted flights. And then delay minutes saved from compressions, and this is in the case of flights are compressed into arrival slots that would otherwise have gone wasted. Should an air flight be cancelled or is late on its departure, ATFM can have a process where those slots are filled up. Their flights that are ready to go can be allocated into those slots to ensure that they the throughput is maximized. Next slide, please. And this slide goes through all the other metrics that I've spoken about: safety, equity, predictability, and flexibility. You can have a look at these once you get the slide presentation. Minutes of highly, in terms of safety, minutes of highly tactic delays avoided, number of demand capacity imbalances addressed, number of minutes of delay overage addressed, equity metric for air carriers. You can measure the amount of delay apportioned to each airline and ensure that there's equity. Predictability, lead time for ATFM measures, it's easy to measure that. How soon is an ATFM measure put in place before the flight actually takes place? Number of stakeholders involved in the ATFM decisions, flight instances in which departure arrival was at or before target time, and then the last one is flexibility, number of flights involved in slot substitutions, and of course number of minutes of slots substitution movements. Certainly not an exhaustive list of the metrics, it's just some suggestions that we've put together of what you could use to derive the benefits of ATFM. Next slide, please. So just going back through the three-step process for benefits of ATFM, understand and derive the benefits, know what to expect. To convince the aviation community of what to expect as a result of ATFM implementation or ATFM enhancement, if you already have some sort of ATFM implementation in place at your ANSP already. Second step, assess performance. Collect all the right data, compute the right metrics, and track performance improvements. And then the lastly is improve performance. Conduct regular analysis to identify areas for potential improvement, enact modifications to procedures. We've seen many of these metrics and how it's performed in various ANSPs. And the last point I want to make is to the ANSPs out there, and I think there's quite a lot of them who are in the early stages of ATFM implementation or are considering ATFM implementation, please do not be intimidated by the processes that have been demonstrated to you today. All these ANSPs that you've seen case studies of have been doing ATFM for a long time. And these processes that have been developed there have been developed over a long period of time. Do not think for a moment that you have to have all these processes in place before you implement ATFM. It's a evolutionary process of ATFM implementation. ATFM, as I often quote, starts off with somebody walking around with a clipboard in an ATC center trying to manage the process, and might have just a short discussion afterwards with the ATCs. Well, did I help you or didn't I help you? That would be the beginnings of post-ops analysis, going right through to what we've seen today in the three ANSPs. So you do not need all of these processes in place to commence with ATFM. Thank you very much for listening. I do hope that these benefits will assist you in convincing your community that there are some significant benefits for ATFM implementation. Thank you, Ken, back to you.
Thank you very much, Stuart, for taking us through the sort of a bigger picture view on how do we go about analyzing the benefits of ATFM implementation. By the way, just as a note here, that the Jesper, the ATFM Post Operations Analysis Framework document that Jesper mentioned in the beginning, it's missing one chapter, which is going to be about the benefits analysis for ATFM implementation, and we are hoping to add that chapter in with, of course, the help from Stuart here to make that document complete. So you can look forward to reading more of that as the next version of the guidance come out. Just want to highlight what Stuart had summarized at the end there, which is the three-step process of assessing ATFM implementation benefits, starting from understanding, right, and setting the right target, the right benefits that you want to look at, and then you collect the data before and after the implementation, and then look at whether you have gained that benefits and try to improve it. And also equally important summary from Stuart there, which is that don't focus necessarily on the complex process, right? Analyzing ATFM benefits and analyzing ATFM operations does not need to be complex, right? It's asking the right questions, setting the right target, and finding the ways to answer those questions, right? That you want to know, that you want to understand. Okay, so thanks again, Stuart, for walking us through the the presentation on the benefits. Now we have come to our final portion of our webinar today, and please stay on, because this portion is bound to be very interesting. It is the questions and answers portion. Now, Let me preface this portion by saying that I am sorry for not being able to cover every single questions that were submitted. For the panelists, you guys have not seen the questions yet. There are a lot, with a capital letter, a lot of questions coming. They are very interesting questions. So unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through all of them. Some of the questions are specific to operations in the UK, to operations in the US and in Australia. Some questions are focused on the ATFM implementation and not on the ATFM post-operations analysis. So what I will be doing is we'll be asking a few questions that are focused on the kind of a bigger picture post-operations analysis / ATFM benefits analysis. But I will leave those specific questions to be answered offline after the webinar by all of these experts here. And then we will send you all the questions with all their associated answers back to you, to the audience, along with the presentation slides. So again, please don't fault me for not asking your questions live on the microphone. We do not have the time for them. But we'll get to hopefully a few very interesting ones here. Okay, so let us begin with the first question, and I'm going to go kind of in order of the presenters here, right? Except for Jespers and Stuart, because I'm gonna, for you guys are on a theory section, I'm going to keep your questions to the end there. So I'm going to start with the question for Dan from NATS UK. So Dan Schuler, this is probably a kind of a one-word question. Are the regulator that you mentioned setting the performance target for you guys, are they your national transport ministry regulator, or is it are they coming from the European level kind of regulatory body?
No, it's through the CAA, which is a national regulator. So it's the targets are derived there, and they're based on a 5-year reference period. So we're in the current reference period, RP3 at the moment, but they are done. It is a national sort of framework rather than the European framework.
Thank you very much, Dan. So the local, the national CAA, and then using the reference from the European network level as the regulator and setting the targets. This is very interesting implementation, because having the regulator being involved in setting the aviation targets and setting ATFM targets for the nation, I think that's a very good model, and hopefully other countries would start to adopt the same model that you have there. One more question for you. Do you guys have the specific agreement in place whereby you can obtain operational data from adjacent ANSPs regarding flights that are managed by your ATFM restrictions, so that you can use them in your post-ops analysis process?
The data we derive, most of the data we'll be using is the network manager data. So it's as part of Eurocontrol, the UK as part of Eurocontrol, we have unlimited access to the database. So we wouldn't, as a matter of course, go through to a neighbour to ask for specific data that is potentially that they hold in addition to that held by the network manager. So it's the data itself is just a common resource amongst Europe.
Thank you, Dan, for that. And this question is interesting because you might think that analyzing ATFM post operations requires a complicated data coming from other countries and other stakeholders. In fact, you can also achieve the simple post operations analysis by using the standard ATS movement messages. For example, in Thailand, for us as well, we analyze our CTOT compliance using the movement messages, so their actual departure, actual takeoff time against the CTOTs. So those are data that we also already have in our possessions without having to have an agreement with another country. The agreement may come in useful for example, if you want to have a conversation about certain results and trying to solve a certain problem, then we might need to start thinking about how do we have an agreement to have a conversation regularly with our neighbor within the network, right? Well, thanks for the answer for that, Dan. I'm going to move to the next questions to the Air Services Australia team. So Dan again, Dan, Shoris, and Phil. Given that you guys, I'm going to ask this because I know you guys have done this work before. Given your 10+ years of experience implementing ATFM, has ATFM resulted in more or less delays for flights when you consider from origin to destination overall?
Phil, do you want to talk about this?
Yep. So generally, when we look at those scenarios when we're not running ATFM and it's all in Airborne, it's essentially an unmanaged flow of traffic. So adding that extra level of control into the system to manage the demand where we do have restricted capacity leads to a lower level of delay. Essentially, you're transferring the delay onto the ground, and that may result in strategic decisions by our airlines in how they manage their fleet of aircraft. I think on a whole, it would reduce the level of delay, but then it also leads into things like cancellations. You simply can't land the number of aircraft in the constrained system.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, considering if you're just looking at the delay, I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but I assume potentially the delay could still go up since we introduced it, just because traffic increased. So it's obviously very important to get the whole picture and not just look at one single metric and making the wrong conclusions.
Thanks, gentlemen. And yeah, I think the key is to also be careful about looking at a particular instances or particular flights, right? Looking at a bigger picture overall over a long period of time. I think that gives a more solid picture of the benefits and in terms of delay, increase or reductions, right? We would always running ATFM, we would always get into cases where an airlines or a pilot comes and say, hey, I'm given so much delay yesterday, right? So there's a danger there of looking at a single flight as opposed to looking at a big picture as a whole. Just maybe quickly from let's say from Dan Schuler of NATS, you guys have also been using a lot of ATFM for a long time. Do you have a similar experience in terms of what's your overall delay has been looking like?
For what period? Sorry, I missed the original question.
Yeah, your question was, having implemented ATFM, have you seen the reduction in delays in the system overall over time?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's more of a case of managed delay. So it's the introduction of sort of a ATFCM or ATFM has allowed us to be in the position of being able to manage delay to within our targets. So there would have been historically a sort of a big effort to get it down to as little delay as possible. However, going there to as little as delay as possible imposes cost on us as an ANSP to actually potentially over-resource ourselves. You have too many controllers, costs a lot of money, you transfer that cost onto your airspace users. So within the context of our delay targets, our effort is to try and achieve a balanced operation where we impose delay within those targets to deliver an efficient ATC service. But the ability for us to manage the delay within that is massively different compared to what 10 years ago. We would have just thrown everything at getting the delay down to zero. Now we put effort into getting it to within those targets. So it's the ability to play within those targets is the important thing.
Thank you very much on that point, Dan. Very interesting in the point about balancing between the cost effective, essentially balancing the cost of delays in various points in the systems, right? Because obviously we also in Thailand have also had to deal with what is the acceptable level of ATFM delays that we can dish out to our airspace users, right? Which translates directly to what level of capacities can we afford to go over or go under, and that's sort of a balancing act. I think that's something that comes up a lot for all of the ATFM implementers here, right? Well, thanks for those answers. I'm going to Actually, one more question for the Air Services Australia team. You guys, you monitor COBT compliance, which is on the departure end, but obviously you run your ground relay program based on an arrival demand. Do you also monitor compliance at the arriving end? So, you know, either a CTO, calculated time over the particular waypoint within the 250 nautical miles arrival, or calculated landing time CLDT at the airport. Do you monitor them as well?
And no, we don't. I mean, just based on the data we normally look at, I would assume, you know, from the moment an aircraft would have left its departure airport, unless there's some, you know, like extreme weather events, convective weather events, I can't think of any other reasons like it wouldn't get towards the 250 nautical miles with a big variation. Like it has to be an aspect. It's just, you know, too wide and too open to cause any kinds of, you know, delays because of sector capacity restrictions.
Yeah, I might jump in there. So in terms of our daily report, our dashboard has the calculated landing time versus the actual landing time. So we sort of see this cascade matrix of aircraft that sort of are arriving early or late. So we do a level of monitoring to look at, you know, why things happened in terms of the arrival sequence. So we do look at those aircraft that, you know, are affected essentially at departure, but what is the net result on landing at the destination aerodrome? So that is a quarter of the daily report that goes out.
Yeah, of course, that's true. I guess the main reason like an aircraft wouldn't like match its calculated landing time would either be like leaving the departure airport late or incurring airborne delay at the destination, right?
Yep. Thank you guys for that. Yeah, I agree. And I think we, and I would can probably generalize to saying most ATFM units that have been running ATFM in the world are probably doing a very similar thing. And, you know, if it's a ground relay program, then we focus on the departure side with an expectation that, you know, once it's airborne, unless barring any unforeseen circumstances, it should be arriving as planned. And then on the arriving end, we kind of focus more on the kind of rather than specific compliance on a particular flight, we look at a bigger picture of the level of demand in the hour, in the whatever the time slots that you're constrained instead, right? I'm going to move the questions now to Vern for your operations over in the US. Vern, the key problems that you talked to us about was the inaccurate EETs, right? Questions from the audience was asked, how did that relate to the calculations of CTOT, and how does that result in, or why does that result in inaccurate CTOTs being put out?
So what we're finding is that we believe, and we're still following the data, we're still pulling the string to see exactly where it leads us. But the early look is that the airlines, the flight operators, are submitting to us inflated EETs. What they're doing is leveraging their own internal automation systems, which calculate the block time from closing the door, pushing back from the gate, to arriving at the gate. And we don't care about that. We care wheels off to wheels on. So there's also probably, we suspect, some other issues. Within FSM, we allow for airlines to substitute flights, one for another, that they are operating into the same airport. And some of those rules that have been collaboratively agreed upon in years past may also be contributing to some inaccurate EETs. So we're looking at both of those, but the way that our system operates is by the arrival slot. It allocates arrival slots at the destination airport, or in the case of an airspace flow program, through a line in space. But you can't control that directly. You have to control the aircraft departure time. So we use the applied EET to calculate the time that the aircraft should depart to arrive in its intended arrival slot. So when the EET is inaccurate, then the delivery at the destination airport is inaccurate because the controlled time for that aircraft to depart is wrong. So it's a garbage in, garbage out calculator scenario. So in an effort to, and this is a collaborative effort, a goal for this year is to improve ground delay program delivery as set by the CDM process. So that's one of the drivers, is as we look at that goal, okay, what are the components of it? And now we're digging into that.
Thanks, Vern, for that. Garbage in, garbage out. I like that. And that's very that's exactly the point of doing post-ops analysis. We make sure that we don't have the garbage coming into the system so that we can put out non-garbage, right, to our stakeholders. But thank you for that. I'm going to turn the questions now to Jesper and Stuart, right? The question to both of you guys, and maybe we'll start with Jesper. In the process of doing your post-ops analysis, once you have gathered the result, how do you get all of these feedback or all these results to your stakeholders, and how do you gather feedback back from them in your experience, I guess both in Australia and also maybe Stuart in South Africa and elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Stuart, if you'd like me to start. Yeah, so for us, obviously, we, as Phil indicated, we got a number of communication channels that we're utilizing. So for basically the post-operational report that Phil showed for the day past, we provide that through essentially every day in email. So it's basically an email of the dashboard that goes to all the stakeholders that are on the distribution list, and that email goes out by we aim to get it out by 10 a.m. in the morning. At the moment, we like to get that process more of a fully automated, where the airlines could potentially actually log on to a portal and see the information in real time. We're not quite there yet, but yeah, at the moment we're sending out on a daily basis. So that's the daily product. So that's just basically a daily push. Then on a weekly basis, we have a weekly debrief call, as Phil highlighted, where we walk through a weekly dashboard and we seek direct feedback from the operators on the performance of the week past. So typically we provide a very short narrative of any significant events that may have occurred throughout the week. And typically the operators would ask questions on why certain things occurred, and we would try to explain why that happens. And quite often from that, there's learning exercise that will be obtained. Then we also have those more strategic products like a monthly or quarterly review. And typically the quarterly reviews are presented at a more higher level forum, where we have the management level of the airlines attending combined with our management levels. And we step through any trends that we might be observing in delays, how we utilize capacity availability. So some of those metrics that Daniel was indicating. So that is a report, but it also is being discussed at that management level during a forum that we typically host four times per year. So it's a variety of communication channels.
So I would just like to say, rather than what the process is in various countries, we've heard some of it, and I think the Australian one is particularly good, and as is the FAA. But just to say to ANSPs, again, developing ATFM post-ops analysis, or in the process of implementing ATFM, is that get this all into your ConOps, write it into your ConOps, and get agreement from all the stakeholders of when and how you are going to feedback and what the expected result would be of that post-ops analysis. And once the information is put to the stakeholders, what are you going to do with it? So it's documented right from the beginning of the implementation process. So learn from all these ANSPs that have got the processes in place already. and make it applicable for your organization. I'm going to say it again. Don't try and do what the FAA is doing from day one. It's not going to work for you. Write into your CONOPS, and your CONOPS should be an evolutionary document which continues to evolve as you become more sophisticated and mature in your ATFM process. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks, Jesper. So once again, various different channels where you can engage with your stakeholders, and like Stuart said, put it up front in your implementation, the process that you want in place, right? So put it in writing, get the understanding with your stakeholders going in terms of the feedback loop from the get-go, and that will make life a lot easier. One last question for Stuart, and then I'm gonna have one more question for the rest of the panelists before we close today. Stuart, how do you balance? Everybody's definition of benefits is different. NSPs want to see one thing, airlines want to see another thing. How do you balance all of that in assessing, demonstrating, reporting the benefits of ATFM?
Sure. I suppose when you do your benefits analysis and you're wanting to present your benefits to the particular stakeholder, so the benefits are very particular to aircraft operators, for example, concentrate on those benefits specifically for the aircraft operators. Look at your airport operator, your aerodrome operator, and see what the specific benefits are for them. Concentrate on those benefits and use those benefits to convince them of ATFM implementation. And likewise for air traffic controllers. And I'll state here quite openly is that one of the most difficult stakeholders to convince for ATFM implementation is often the air traffic controllers themselves. And again, show what the benefits are for ATFM implementation is to them. Produce a strong case for each stakeholder that you're going to be speaking to with good solid metrics, examples from other ANSPs have implemented ATFM, case studies, anecdotal information is also often very useful in convincing on the benefits of ATFM implementation. So just in summary, make it specific to who the stakeholder you're talking to.
Thank you, Stuart, for that. Making sure, making sure as you talk to different stakeholders, you make sure you understand what their needs are, right? And make your statement kind of specific to them. And I think that's a good exercise for every NSPs out there looking to implement ATFM, because I think having the empathy, having the understanding of your stakeholders is an important prerequisite to successful programs. Final questions to go around the room for all of our panelists. Just one piece of recommendations for NSPs looking to start their ATFM post-operations analysis process. Just one piece each. Starting with Dan of NATS, please.
Recommend. Oh, that's a tough one. It's understanding really sort of who your stakeholders are, who your customers are, and as Stuart said, is trying not to invent everything at the first go. At the first go, I'm guessing sort of is trying to identify the key disbenefits, what drives the poor performance, which is going to be the easiest way of tackling it, with the bigger sort of picture you can then gain once you understand what causes pain for everybody, rather than the other way around.
Understanding your stakeholders. Perfect, thank you. Dan and Phil of the Air Services team.
Yes, certainly start slow. I think Stuart had a very nice slide which showed like how you over apply ATFM, you're going to have negative benefits. So in the case of air services, as Phil was saying, we've got our 4 airports with relatively high demand, but we're actively monitoring the periods throughout the day, which can be very different depending on the traffic composition, and only running ATFM for periods at those airports where it's really necessary, and not just apply ATFM like just because we can. And I think that's a very important step in getting acceptance from all stakeholders.
Yeah, my top tip would probably be share the information you have, provide that level of transparency in your sort of reporting to make sure that everyone has the same information. It's a collaborative process, and that's really key to making it work.
Thank you. So start slow and be transparent with your information and share collaboratively with your stakeholders. Vern, your recommendation?
Well, pretty much as everybody else has already said, it's the same things. However, every ANSP is unique, has unique constraints, unique challenges, unique concerns. So my advice would be start from where you're at. If that means, as Stuart talked about, it's somebody with a clipboard and a pencil writing down information as the day goes along, then that's where you're at. Start there. If you're at the stage of just simply using Excel worksheets to track things, that's fine. Start from wherever you're at. Look for what you're trying to accomplish in this step. Clearly define that in your ConOps, and then, as everybody else said, engage the stakeholders, and every day take a small step.
Thanks for that, Vern. So not only understanding stakeholders, but understanding yourself as well, right? And start from where you are. Jesper, final word from you, sir.
Yeah, I think most of it has been said. I think it's understand the key problems that you're trying to solve. And the other one I would say is start simple, as Vern's indicated as well. Obviously, some of the material that's being presented today has been the product of many years of analysis and in investment, but you don't really need that much to start on reporting on ATFM performance. Even if you've got a system in place, there's some basic data. You can already start to identify some key trends and start to drill down from there. So yeah, my advice would be understand what the key problems that you're trying to solve and start simple.
Thank you for that, understanding the problems and start simple. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for being our panelists today and for imparting your expertise, your knowledge to all the audience out there. I have learned a lot myself, and I'm sure all the audience out there have learned from you guys as well. So thanks again for sparing your time, especially for the team from Australia. I know it is very late for you guys now. So really, on behalf of everybody, really appreciate your support today. Helen, if you could please bring out the contact information slide, please. Here we go. So by the way, the presentation deck, the replay of the recording of this session, the presentation deck, and the list of questions and answers, both the ones that have been answered live just now and the ones that have not been answered, of which there are a lot. There's around about a dozen questions that came in during the webinars. And then about dozens of them, another dozen that came in while we were having our Q&A sessions, which I couldn't get to reading them, came in. So our panelists will be busy answering them in writing, and then we will supply all of those along with the slide deck and the recording to you via email, probably in the next week or the week after. So rest assured you will get all these materials for your reference later on. You can also reach out to all of our panelists. Their contact information is on the screen. It will also be sent out to you along with the slide deck. Right? Helen, if you could please go to the next slide, please. As a final word from me on behalf of CANSO Operations Program Manager Colleen Horisco, who cannot join us until the very end today due to another commitment, I'd like to welcome interested members out there to join one of our many work groups and help drive our various work programs to ensure CANSO continues to be the effective voice of air traffic management industry for the years to come. So feel free to reach out to Colleen for more information. You can also reach out to us if you're interested in CANSO ATFM ACDM work group. The name of the 3 co-chairs on there on the slides. If you would like to join our work, we have a long line of ATFM, ACDM related tasks coming up for our 2021 here. So reach out to us if you have any questions, reach out to us if you are interested, and reach out to Colleen if you are interested in other CANSO work programs, which ranges from PBN, environment, to operational performance, and various other things, okay? So thanks again for joining us tonight. Thanks again for sticking all the way until the very end, and I hope you learned a lot from these sessions. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Helen to close us off. Thanks again from me.
Thank you, Kin, and thank you to all our speakers today, and a great big thank you to you all for attending today's webinar. So once you leave today, you'll receive a survey, and we would appreciate it if you could complete that and provide your feedback. On behalf of CANSO, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.